and getting some insight and some knowledge on how to better prepare yourselves moving forward, particularly as the summertime is coming. So I'm not going to take up too much time more from the instruction that we're about to receive. Please take notes, and at the end, feel free to ask any questions that you may have because they are here for you. Thank you. Gentlemen.
Yeah. How's everybody doing? Excellent, excellent. So can I ask a favor of everybody to move down so we can get a little bit more intimate with each other? Everybody come forward. So that way, especially if we have some people come in that are running a little behind schedule, they won't feel too shaky in terms of coming in front of everybody and taking a seat. So they just come in and sit right behind you. Let's get a little closer, that's all. We'll get as intimate as we can. Wayne, you good back there? Okay. Okay, once again, everybody, my name is Dion Michael Ashman. I'm about to be a 59-year resident of this neighborhood. I've seen some of you walking back and forth along Crown Street between Bedford and Rogers, which is my block, also codenamed Medgar Evers Lane. Been doing this kind of work actually with the personal development and counseling about 12 years, but working with kids who have fallen victim to the risk and at-risk use for 21 years. I'm joined by my fraternity brother and good friend, Brother Jason Gamble. Give it up for Jason, please. A great deal of counseling with young people, especially up in the Bronx. 4 different locations: Daniel Hill Williams School, Phipps Academy, Wings Academy, and also PS 140. We will soon be going into the Horizon Juvenile Correction Facility in the Bronx once again to work with these young kids and let them know what their rights are and how to reshape some of their thinking. One of the things that I wanted to do is also explain to you why we're here, but I'm gonna let Jay talk about a relationship that we had with Horizons back in the day, where we went to speak to some youth and how that impacted 2 of them particularly. Jay?
Okay, first of all, good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Jason Gamble. I'm the Vice President of Roadside Lending Chapter of Alpha Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. It's the Bronx Alphas, but we also have a nonprofit called Ready for the World, right? And what Ready for the World does is provides us, arming us with the knowledge of what they don't teach you in schools. One of the things, unfortunately, they don't teach you in schools is what you can control in terms of interaction with the police. So hopefully some of the things that we arm you with today will help you out if you end up in any type of situation with the police. More importantly, you have to know the difference between the 3 different interactions that you potentially have, right? As Brother Ashton mentioned, we have done this work for quite a while. One of the talks we did was actually at Horizons Correctional Facility in the Bronx. During that time, we actually were able to inspire some of the young men to come up to us and ask for help. 2 of them in particular, Dante and Michael, came up, asked us, could you help us out in any way? We, after having a conversation with them, we obliged. Both the young men were 16 years old, and they were both fathers, unfortunately, who ended up incarcerated for relatively minor crimes. And it potentially could hurt their future. So we didn't just say, oh, we're going to support you. We actually bought them suits. We bought them. I went personally there, measured them, made sure they got suits, showed up in court, and just having that interceding in any way, shape, or form, made a difference. It made such a difference that Dante actually was able to be released on that day. He would have been released if not for his mother doing a couple of other things. But then Michael actually had a reduced sentence. So the point of telling this story is sometimes you make a huge impact by being proactive rather than reactive. And we realize this, right? Very often when we talk about the issues that happen in our community, it's in reaction to something, as opposed to arming ourselves in advance with exactly what is necessary in order for us to move forward, move positive, and deal with any conflicts that may come, right? Because we can't help what happens to us, but we can help we can decide how we want to proceed forward, right? And then when traumatic things happen, we can also decide how we want to heal when it happens, right? By a show of hands, anybody here has had an interaction with police in the past that they wish they could receive some sort of justice with? Anybody here?
Put your hands
Got
up.
one? Okay. And don't be afraid. I mean, what we're trying to do is have sort of a safe space to have a conversation. Because I know my interactions with police, my first really bad interaction with police, I was actually on my way home in full track uniform. I'm not from Brooklyn, I'm originally from Queens. Don't hold that against me. I went to Thomas Edison High School and I ran track. And our track uniforms were blue and gold. You could spot us a mile away, right? But walking home, we were stopped by myself and two other gentlemen. We were stopped by the police who accused us of robbing a house in bright blue track uniforms. Now, I was lucky in the fact that my stepdad, he's a probation officer. Now he currently runs probation for Brooklyn, for youth offenders. And so he armed me with certain things, including having a small badge that I could carry with me on my keychain, which the police officer saw. He stuttered a little bit and he let me go. But I tried to explain to him that the rest of the guys were with me and he didn't want to let them go. Now, people react differently. One of my friends, he doesn't trust or like police at all. The other one became a police officer. So there's different routes and different reactions to, traumatic incidents like that. Some people try to be in change. Some people try other means. But today, we just want to talk about laying a basic foundation for knowing your rights and how to proceed. Okay? So to begin, what rights do I have? Whether you are or you aren't a citizen, you have these basic rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to be free of a reasonable search and seizure, and you have the right to be an advocate for change. These three are core, right? One of the main things that you want to remember is being an advocate for change, because that's part of the reason why we keep going into these cycles of not actually moving forward on some of these issues, because people may have issues with police. And does anyone know the number one reason why police brutality doesn't stop? Number one reason. If anybody had to guess.
Yes, I believe it's because of racism.
Oh, absolutely, because of race. But it's also because of lack of accountability, right? Because if something happens and it's never reported, do you ever actually get anything extra that comes from it? No. Do you get opportunity to get any type of investigation? No. The sad part is the majority of police interactions never actually go reported, right? And I do understand there's this underlying fear that we won't get justice. But understand this, if a police officer is reported 200, 300 times, and then finally they do something, but you can't say, the one thing that the system can't say is that no one reported, right? So keep in mind, we want to establish a paper trail. We want to establish a pattern of habits when it comes to police officers.
The Fifth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution gives every person the right not to answer questions asked by a police officer or a government agent. I wish to remain silent. Family, oftentimes what happens is that when we're questioned by the police, we get nervous, maybe palms get a little sweaty, and you may say something that will be held against you, and you do have the right to remain silent. But you have to literally let them know, you just simply, I may be getting a little ahead of myself right now, but you just can't be silent. You have to respectfully, officer, I wish to remain silent. If you don't say that, literally the officer will assume that you are consenting. But that much you have to say, I wish to remain silent. Jay?
When it comes to unreasonable search and seizure, the Fourth Amendment is supposed to protect your privacy from government intrusion. Police cannot search you your possessions, your home, etc. You can consent verbally. Your silence gives police the consent, right? So in other words, you don't want to just remain silent and not say anything. It's not on this slide, but one of the things that they'll do is sometimes assume that a person has mental disabilities, and they'll try to actually commit you for a 24-hour survey if you just don't say anything, or if you're looking at them a certain way. It is smart to realize that what comes out of your mouth is important. It gives you direction. It helps you to control the situation. So even if you have to say it multiple times, I do not consent to search. If they have a camera on, look into it. Make sure you say, I do not consent to search. If you have any sort of a witness that can corroborate to it, make sure that you're telling as many people as possible that you never at any point consent to a search, right? The exception, of course, would be the search warrant, and that has to be signed off by a judge, and we are going to talk further about that.
Continuing the right to free and unreasonable searches and seizures without a warrant, police or government agents may not search your home or office without your consent. And you have the right to refuse to let them in. I don't consent to this search. Must be said out loud. Your silence indicates to police that you consent or agree to what they are doing. So once again, you want to make sure that you let them know that I don't consent to the search.
Now, a search warrant is a court permission to seize, and it's normally specific. It's specific things that have to be evidence of a crime. With the warrant, it has to be reasonable, articulable suspicion of a crime or proof that you've actually committed a crime. You can now they can't enter your home without permission or your presence if they have an actual warrant. This is important to understand, but that's only with the warrant.
Exceptions to the warrant requirement: weapons, a search within your wingspan, your car, or in your person, your exigent circumstances or emergencies, hot pursuit, plain view doctrine. If the public can see it and a cop can see it, cops will be able to legally seize it. Now, the Patriot Act and other recent federal laws are intended to gut your Fourth Amendment rights. So we have to be mindful of all of this. Have to be incredibly mindful. These are the exceptions. Understand it. Know it. Wrap your head around it. We want to make sure that we know what our rights are.
Now, it's not on the slide, but one of the things that's important to know is they literally have to show you the warrant. A police officer cannot show up at your house and basically say, we have a warrant to search your premises. And if you ask them, they can say, well, we have it, we'll show it to you later. They have to literally show you the warrant. There's no exceptions to that rule. And I emphasized this before, the right to be an advocate for change. The amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects the right of groups and individuals to advocate for changing law, government practices, and even the form of government. However, the ICE can, and those of you who know ICE, they primarily target people who are non-citizens. They can target non-citizens for deportation. But the First Amendment, it's slightly different. We'll talk about this a little bit later in the slides, because we also cover what happens if you're not an American citizen, but you do have certain rights as a person who's not an American citizen.
The constitutional rights cannot be suspended, even during a state of emergency or wartime. And they have not been suspended by the U.S. Patriot Act or other recent legislation. So you have your rights no matter what.
Okay, so here's the thing, and if you have a conversation with a lot of police officers, sometimes they don't even know the three basic interactions that you usually have with law enforcement. And in escalating order, this is what they are. It's a conversation, it's detention, and it's arrest. And the three are totally different. All right, we're going to go through the distinctions of each, but it's very important for you to know that there's key differences in each interaction.
Tips of interacting with cops: try and keep your hands visible at all times in plain sight. Try to stay in well-lit places with witnesses if possible. You are probably being recorded by a cop, especially if you end up inside of a squad car. You have the right to video or audio tape police in public as long as you tell them you are recording and you are not interfering with the investigation. So give the public service announcement. I'm recording. I want you to know, but do it respectfully. You don't want to use this as a term to be a hero or a heroine or shero. You want to make sure that you are just letting them know that you know your rights.
Just a caveat to that. So that first point that's highlighted, try to keep your hands visible. Does anybody know why that's important? Right?
Yeah, because you show them that you don't have any gun, like a weapon, that's
Yep. Empty hands means that you don't have a weapon, right? I'm a former military officer, United States Army. Like one of the things that we used to do when you had to detain somebody is make sure nothing's in their hands, right? Because we had opposable phones, and that's part of what allows you to carry a knife, carry a gun, so on and so forth. Your hands are empty, they know that it's safe, right? If you're pointing out that, and then also fast movements. If I'm moving fast, they don't necessarily know what I'm reaching for or not reaching for. So it's important to keep in mind, you want to make sure your hands are visible, right? Hands up, don't shoot, right? Next slide, please. All right, so what's key with a conversation, you're under no legal obligation to have a conversation with police, FBI, ICE, TSA, or any sort of investigator on any level. There's no law that says that you have to have a conversation with them. If you agree to talk to them, it's a different story. You'd be very likely to give them the very information that they need if they're looking to find something to prosecute you, right? Your best bet is to politely but firmly refuse to speak to them. Make sure it's articulated. Again, polite. Always make the refusal to speak to them clear in words as opposed to simply shaking your head. And then ask them the question, am I being detained or am I free to go?
So detention. A police officer may only detain you if he or she has a reasonable suspicion that you are involved with a crime. Reasonable suspicion must be more than a mere hunch. Police must be able to put their reasonable suspicion into words under the law. This is called articulable suspicion provision. Once again, police must be able to put their reasonable suspicion into words. Under the law, this is called articulable suspicion provision. And then you ask, am I being detained? And if you are being detained, you respectfully ask, why?
And just a caveat to that too, always get the why. If they, very often people are detained and they never tell you why they're actually being detained. That's problematic in and of itself, right? Because if your bag is searched, you have things taken out, and then they tell you, oh, we haven't found anything, go about your day. That is an illegal search. That is something that needs to be reported, as soon as possible, right? What to do if you're stopped by the police? Remember that what you say can and will be used against you. Stay calm and in control of your words and actions. Avoid arguing with the police by firmly asserting your rights. Never run or physically resist, even if you think that the stop was unreasonable and unlawful. Ask if you are free to leave. If they say yes, do so. If you're not, you are not required to provide identification if they are not detaining, unless you are a driver of a motor vehicle, right? And personal opinion, you all can do what you will, but I would never consent to a search, ever.
And just to reiterate, remember, you don't have to show your ID unless you're the driver. That's the caveat, unless you're the driver.
An important caveat to this, it varies from state to state. But for all intents and purposes in New York, you do not have to show your ID if you're not the driver.
If you are not free to go, ask why you are being detained. You must provide name, address, date of birth, if detained, but are not required to say anything else. It's a crime to give a false name. Once again, it's a crime to give a false name. Police must ID their name, agency, and badge number. So they need to give you their name, agency, and badge number as well. You may be patted down, and any possessions within your reach may be searched if police reasonably suspect you pose an imminent threat of serious physical injury. Write down everything you can remember about the police interaction, including the officers' names and badge numbers. And once again, don't consent to any search.
Okay, this is something that everybody needs to have made abundantly clear. And this has actually been backed up, believe it or not, constitutionally. Cops can lie to trick you, right? So a cop can pull you in the room and say, "We know what you did. You know, your friend told us X, Y, and Z." And all these things are to get the so-called collar, to get you to admit to something that in some cases they even know you didn't do, right? So we have to be honest with it. Yes, we're told police are here to protect us, but at the same time, we're human beings and human beings have different agendas. And when you add in other things like racism, it becomes pretty slippery slope, right? So the police are allowed to lie to you and misinform you. Don't be fooled, right? Many times they will promise you that your situation will be easier if you fully cooperate and or tell them what they want to know. But they do not have to follow through with their promises. So what does this look like? A person is sitting in a room and they'll say, okay, if you confess to X, Y, and Z, and you know in your heart you didn't actually do it, you'll get a shorter sentence and we'll go to trial, so on and so forth. In some cases, people agree to it on record, and then they get extremely large sentences, right? It's really a way of expediting the court system and allowing them to make money faster. Because believe it or not, when you talk about the cost of putting people in prison, you talk about it's business, it's money involved with that. It's the fact that you do have fines that come in, right? If you take any police station out there, you'll have a squad of at least 20 people handing out different summonses that amount to, on an average, about $150. So if you're handing out 23 summonses a day, $150, bottom line, if you do the math, for 52 weeks out of the year, each individual police officer is probably bringing in somewhere around $8 million per police station to the government. That's a lot of money, right? And so we have to keep these things in mind. There's a bigger picture that a lot of people aren't talking about. And it is causing extreme trauma to people. But when we look at what happened to the Central Park Five, you had a situation where unfortunately one of the young men didn't want to confess, but his father said it would be easier if you just confess, right? That was a relationship that was destroyed for the rest of their lives, because at no point should anybody be forced to admit to something that they know they didn't do.
And I'll just add this too, Brother Jason, is that we have to remember also what the police were originally created for. Although we've come a long way, the police were initially created as the Paddy Patrol, later to be known as the Slave Patrol. Their purpose was to protect white privilege and white wealth. So it later became about community policing and professionalism, and we all know that is in question. So the more we have a better understanding of what our rights are, the better we'll be able to have these kinds to be able to have these kinds of conversations. It's by design that we're here today, and that my son is 16 years, about to be 18 years old, in the audience to get ready for college. So I'm making sure that he's here among you all to learn this as well. So understand what we're dealing with.
Yeah, just a caveat to what Brother Ashby was saying. And mind you, you all are getting the presentation 2.0. This is when we talk about this and we get deep into the fact that the origins of police come from slave patrols. A lot of people don't know that, right? If you look at the original oath that was given by slave patrols in Virginia, and you look at the original police oath, they're nearly identical. And so you have to ask yourself, how far have we moved from the origin? Have we gone from, let me see your slave papers, to let me see your ID, right? It's a deep conversation to have, and something that's uncomfortable that people don't want to talk about. But there's a difference between how an organization is branded and how it's actually interacting, right? You see even now that there are police officers who are, for lack of a better saying, ratting out their peers for the fact that they have quotas, right? Arrest quotas. How do you have a quota on crime? It's part of the problem in and of itself, right? So do you think that they're going to Fifth Avenue or they're going to Park Avenue to fill those quotas? Or are they going to places in Brooklyn where people don't have the money to defend themselves? Think about that. So that's part of a deeper question. I'm sure we'll definitely get back to that. But when you ask them, am I under arrest? The police cannot move you unless you are under arrest, meaning that they can't take you from wherever location you are. They can't put you in the vehicle. Normally under detention, they're not going to actually put you in the vehicle. They're going to take you to the side, they're going to pat you down, and they're going to say, it's for my safety and your safety. They're going to tell you to sit on the curb. But the minute they put you in that car, they have to have a reason for actually arresting, right? If you are arrested, immediately ask for a lawyer. Do not respond to any police inquiries at all, right? If you're under 18, and this is important, are there anybody in here under 18? Okay. All right. So it's important to know that everything that we mentioned applies to you even more if you're under 18. Why? Because your parent needs to be present, or your guardian needs to be present. And police officers need to know they can't even arrest you without promptly alerting your parents. But unfortunately, it happens, and it's a constant rights violation that will not happen. If you are injured, seek medical attention and make sure that they take photos of it, right? There are situations where people are unlawfully detained, they get ankle sprains, they get scratches, so on and so forth. Anytime you go to a doctor's office or anytime you go to a hospital for treatment, you can ask them legally to take photos of everything. And later on, you can go get those photos and have them as part of your report. Every bit of evidence you have matters.
Arrest. So you are going to jail. The police may arrest you if they witness you breaking the law, have probable cause to believe you have committed a crime, or have an arrest warrant signed by a judge for your arrest. If you commit an act of nonviolent civil disobedience, then you have broken the law, most likely in front of police officers, and therefore they may arrest you because they witnessed it.
Searches. When making an arrest, police are allowed to search you to the skin, right? And what to the skin means is not within any of your orifices, without getting too graphic. That is deep searches, as they're called, are only allowed by medical professionals, and it's normally by the same sex. So no, a male cannot just touch a female anywhere or reach anywhere. Any type of violation like that needs to be reported immediately. They may search your bags, they may search your vehicle, right? But that's only the things that they can visibly see if it's part of the actual crime. Case in point, if you were accused of committing a crime like stealing a bank, and they look in the back seat and actually see a weapon, well, they can actually search that vehicle at that particular time, right? They know what crime it is, they know, and they can visibly see what's going on. Officer can search your body, must be your own gender. I mentioned that again. It's a interesting conversation to have in America right now because there are a lot of different gender identities, but that can be articulated, right? So if you feel uncomfortable and you identify as a different gender, tell the person and see if they'll accommodate you or ask for a supervisor. Okay. And then any transdermal piercings, or if somebody has a piercing in the belly button, anybody has a piercing in the area, they can take those off of you because in some cases they can be considered as a weapon.
The Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent and to refuse to answer questions. Anything you do, say, can, and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney and to have an attorney present when questioned. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you at no charge. This is very important for you to understand your rights. They're supposed to, when they're arresting you, they're supposed to, by law, read you your rights.
Right. And I know some people have circumstances where they may think, hey, I'm poor, I can't necessarily afford an attorney or legal representation. Everyone is afforded legal representation. So if they tell you, hey, it's going to cost a lot of money or anything that's discouraging, that is a lie. Everyone is part of the constitutional right to have representation. Now, if you decide to answer questions now without an attorney present, you will retain the right to stop at any point. You can stop answering questions and you can say, well, I really want an attorney right now, right? Because under some circumstances, people begin talking and they realize they're saying a little bit much. The best bet is to stop, wait for an attorney to be present. And when your attorney is present, you can even ask him or her if it's appropriate to answer the question. You look to them because they have a deeper knowledge of the law and they'll be able to give you some assistance on which way to go. Do you understand your rights as explained? If anybody has anything that may be keeping them from fully understanding, whether if it's a language barrier, whether if you have a learning disability, you can make them aware of it. And they have to give you some sort of support in order to make sure you understand your rights. Knowing and understanding your rights as they've been explained to you. Are you willing to answer my question without an attorney present? They're going to ask you these things, right? My personal choice, I would never, ever, ever answer questions by law enforcement authorities without actually having an attorney present. That's my personal preference, because you're going to get a perspective that you wouldn't necessarily understand, right? The law is kind of coded in a way where the average person doesn't necessarily understand. And you may say something that actually incriminates you. So it is in your best interest not to answer questions unless you have somebody who's, for lack of a better way of saying it, a translator for you.
Demand of rights. I will not talk to you or anyone about anything. I demand to have an attorney present before I speak to you or anyone. I will not answer any questions or reply to any charges without my attorney present. I do not agree to perform any tests, consent to any searches, or participate in any lineups except DUI testing that don't involve words. I will not sign anything unless my attorney agrees I should do so, except a jail release form for agreement. I will not waive any of my constitutional rights. Critical here, very critical.
Yeah, it's very critical, especially with young people who may not necessarily understand the language of some things. There are people who have literally signed confessions, not simply because they're not paying attention. When you think about it, we all sign documents and we may not necessarily read every piece of a document. And very often lives have been destroyed just because someone is slipping and not paying attention to detail, right? So if they ask you to sign something, I don't want to sign without my attorney present. I don't want to sign without my parent or guardian present. These are key. Simple conversations for each one, right? So we're going to go into what a simple conversation goes really fast. what is a detention, what's arrest. And so it's Mr. Officer, he goes, hi, can I ask you a couple of questions? Are you detaining me or am I free to go? Well, I just want to talk to you. I choose not to talk without my parents present, or I choose not to talk without my attorney present. Very simple, right? And under most circumstances, they'll just let you go, right? Because if you haven't been accused of an actual crime, what reason do they have to keep you there? Right? And most people don't understand as your constitutional right that even if they think that you've actually witnessed a crime, you're under no obligation to speak to a police officer. None. You don't have to say a thing.
Detention. The officer. Hi, can I ask you a couple of questions? You? Are you detaining me or am I free to go? The cop. I'm detaining you. Hands against the wall, feet back, and spread. You? Why am I being detained? What is your reasonable suspicion of what we're looking for? And memorize and report the response. Give them your ID and remain quiet.
Okay? Caveat to that. You don't want to just remain quiet. At all times, always remember this rule. You're trying to find as much information as possible for a later report. So you're paying attention to who are the police officers, what are their names, what's their ranks, what if there's any identifiable marks. You know, if a police officer has a tattoo on his forearm or something, what's his haircut, what's his weight, what's his height, all these things, the same way that they would profile you, you want to make sure that you keep note of that so that later on, if you have to report them, you'll have that information.
And we don't say this, but breathe. Take a beat and breathe. Inhale, exhale. Feel yourself being alive in the moment so that you can stay clear-headed and do exactly the things that Brother Gamble was talking about. Breathe.
Yeah.
So you can get through it properly.
Oh, or you switch.
Oh,
I got it.
Yep.
Okay, so the cop may say, I'm placing you under arrest. I'm going to remain silent. Make sure you verbalize it again. I want to contact my parents. I want to contact my attorney, right? If you're under a certain age, you definitely, and you also want to make sure that you get your phone call, which you get in. And they'll tell you that's fine. You'll be able to contact your parents or contact whomever at the police station, right? And then also, you are allowed to ask them at that moment, exactly what are you being arrested for?
oops. All right. Asserting your rights. I'm going to remain silent. I want to contact an attorney. This phrase immediately invokes your constitutional Fifth Amendment rights, which protect you from the police interrogation. Once you utter these words, the police are legally required to stop questioning you. Even if you don't already have an attorney, police must provide you with a phone book. Invoking your right to have an attorney present is a fundamental right. It is a fundamental right.
Okay, so grand juries. A subpoena to a grand jury is a written order for you to appear at a secret court proceeding and testify under oath about information to government. The government believes you have about a crime or fugitive, right? You have a right to an attorney. You should not speak to an agent until your attorney is present. And threats are common by the FBI. FBI has a 96% conviction rate because they literally go to training to basically figure out how to get information from people where you don't even know that you're giving them what's necessary, right? One thing that's important with a subpoena for a grand jury, show up on time, right? Because what ends up happening is there's a bench warrant issued for you and you don't even know, right? Then suddenly you're stopped anywhere and you end up being arrested. It literally is one of the main reasons why a lot of people get arrested for the first time. They have a warrant under their name and they just don't know, right? So whenever you have a court appearance, and this goes for multiple things. Anytime you have a court appearance, make sure you put it up on your refrigerator or somewhere where you can actually find it. Make sure you put it in your phone planner and everywhere else. Make sure that you take the day off of work and make sure that you're going to get there on time, because that's one of the traps that puts you in the system.
What are my rights at airports? You gave airport personnel permission to scan you and your bags by buying a ticket and going to the airport. They can do additional random searches for persons and property regardless of whether the initial scan turns up anything suspicious. If the scan does disclose something that might be a weapon, the law is unclear whether you have the right to leave the airport rather than being searched. The airplane pilot can refuse to fly a passenger if he or she believes the passenger is a threat to the safety of the flight. And if you are entering the country, the U.S. Customs Service has the right to stop and search every person and item.
So let's unpack that. The airport is not normal domain, it's federal domain. So with that, yes, it may seem like unreasonable search and seizure, but they can search the person because it's for the greater public good, and in some cases, it's the international good, right? Because unfortunately, you do have people who have nefarious intents, and they may seek to poison people, so on and so forth. In order for public safety, they're allowing them to circumvent your constitutional right in order to check. But does it mean that you have to agree to every single type of search? For example, a lot of people need to know that the body scanners, you can opt out of that. I opt out every time, and when you opt out, they actually give you a pat down. I don't go through body scanners. I don't go through any of the metal detectors or anything like that, because there's just no long-term data on what exactly that does to us. So I choose to opt out. They'll have you stand to the side and they'll find someone of the same gender to search you instead. And it's a simple pat down as if you're going to a club. But these are things that most people don't know, right? In addition, if you do have a carry, if there are things that they find that, I mean, it may sound silly, but I recently took a flight from Scottsdale, Arizona, and I had a nail clipper on my keychain, and they had to confiscate it because the pilots don't want anything that could be even remotely sharp. But this is the world that we live in. So if you know things like this, you can leave it home and you won't have a situation like my situation where they throw away a perfectly good nail clipper for no reason, right? These are things that if we know them in advance, we can plan in advance and we can avoid certain snafus.
Now, internationally speaking, we traveled, Brother Gamble and I traveled on an ancient study tour to Egypt, a Kemetic study tour. And traveling there, I had my toothpaste. And I had this toothpaste, and it was no problem going to Cairo and all other parts that we traveled to. But coming back, when we got back to Cairo airport, they actually took my toothpaste and they threw it away. And a little bit of the water I had from the Nile River, they took that and they dumped that out also. So, yeah, you're kind of in their domain, and we have to kind of abide. Although Noah did come back with water from the Nile River. He buried it deep into his luggage and put it down below in the hole. And I wasn't so fortunate, but at any rate, yes, we have to be mindful of all of that. Okay.
Yeah, and usually what will happen with most airports is they provide an actual list of what you can and can't bring. You'll find signs posted all around, and it's usually before you go through an actual line, right? What's important too when it comes to firearms or knives, especially a knife of 2 inches or more, you probably wouldn't want to bring it because it's federal domain, and it will usually result in an arrest. Even though you may not actually be prosecuted down the line, depending on the circumstances, you still don't want that type of legal trouble. So always check your person to make sure that you don't have any contraband when you go into the airport. Right? So I get this question a lot. What if I am not a citizen and ICE contacts me? ICE cannot enter your home without your consent. They do not have to answer the door or speak to an ICE agent. You can assert your rights. Failure to demand your rights may result in a waiver of your rights, and ICE may deport you under those circumstances. Do not rely on agents or family members to translate important legal information. Demand for an actual interpreter, right? So a lot of people, let's say you're Spanish speaking, English is your second language. You may think it's okay to have a family member actually translate for you. I would definitely suggest that you get an actual translator who can translate the legal terms, because there are different subtleties in language that may not get through with that particular family. So talking to a lawyer, you're not entitled, okay. All right, this is kind of interesting, right? So when you are, when you're not necessarily a citizen, you may not necessarily be entitled to a free lawyer, and they may actually provide you with representation from their particular court. This is interesting because it varies from state to state, right? And what I found is that quote unquote blue states tend to be more accommodating. If you're in a quote unquote red state such as Texas, they usually are providing lawyers for you via their state, right? So sometimes, unfortunately, if you're not a citizen, you're not afforded a lawyer of your own choosing. They will have pretty much a generic lawyer, and sometimes that lawyer is not necessarily in the best interest. The immigration laws are complex and they're constantly changing. ICE will not explain your options to you. As soon as you can, you need to call or speak to an attorney. That attorney will give you a different perspective and it'll help you out a little bit more. So this is important. I'm suggesting that everybody actually takes a photo of this because you always want to report misconduct. And there are 7 basic levels of reporting misconduct. There's agency, there's division. These phone numbers apply to New York, right? The business hours are from 8 to 5 p.m. You can go through internal affairs to file a complaint, leave a message, they'll get back to you, right? And believe it or not, the internal affairs is actually kind of overwhelmed in terms of the number of complaints. So even though it may seem like you won't get through eventually they will get back to you, right? And then there's what's important, and this is another step that people don't go to, the Office of the Inspector General, they take complaints. Currently, there's an online form that you can go to. Excuse me, you can go to Google, you can look that up, and the phone number there is 212-860-5200. This is a huge part because it's part of being an advocate for change, knowing where to go and what times. So what's important too, you have the option also of making a formal complaint online and in person. You can choose to do both. The more complaints you put in, the better, right? And you have to understand that there are provisions where you can put in a complaint, even with your local community board as well, to make sure it's on record. So you want to go local, you want to go city, you want to go state, and depending on how bad it is, you want to go federal, and we'll get into that. Does anybody else need additional time for this slide? Okay.
So it's the civil rights violation, the U.S. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Criminal Section PHB, 950 Pennsylvania Avenue, Northwest, Washington, D.C., 20530. And of course, the phone number is 202-514-3204. The website is also there. Remember, if the police force has enough complaints, the federal government will intervene and disband or replace personnel, report everything. We'll leave it there for a second to give you all a moment to either take a picture of it or Write a phone number down if you want, or website.
And this last bullet point is so key. Does anybody know what police departments were recently disbanded because of federal complaints? Okay, so possibly the biggest one was actually Baltimore, right? Because what happened with Baltimore, there were so many complaints that very often when policemen go to trial, you have to get enough people for a jury. And what they were finding was that the people in Baltimore were harassed so often, you couldn't find an impartial jury. Everyone almost unanimously thought that police officers were the problem. You had tons of cases that came out, everything from a man who had actually gotten a refinance on his own property. He was actually robbed by the police where they took the money from him, right? After the federal division, there was actually a special division that they had that was set up to police with the community. And what they found was that this drug enforcement division was actually stealing from the community, taking resources, terrorizing people, and eventually it led to a federal lawsuit, which tons of police officers ended up being indicted and put into jail, right? Now, I'm gonna be honest with you, the part that's discouraging is that things like this take time, right? And during that time, there are gonna be a lot of people that unfortunately will be hurt. There are a lot of incidences that will happen, but they can only do something if it's actually properly reported. And the sad part is very few people know that they can actually report to the Justice Department something that happens to you on a local level. But what you think happens if over 1,000 reports happen with the Justice Department? Eventually, they have to do something, right? Because New York City alone pays over $650 million per year due to police misconduct. Now, they don't feel that because it's taxpayers' money, right? But eventually, it gets to a point where they have to do something. It just, the optics of it just looks bad, right? And in order to turn the tables, we have to know the proper ways to report these things.
And we have to be better at taking care of us. Other groups across the country are very good at taking care of each other. And they will literally call who they have to call until they get the results they want. You have to put the full court press on. And you have to be diligent. You have to give a little bit of intensity and also understand your rights.
So here's 7 basics. Make sure your hands are visible. That's a huge one. Make sure you keep a calm voice. And I understand when people are under duress or they feel like they're being treated poorly, it's hard to keep a calm voice. But as Brother Ashman said, take a breather. You don't have to get upset, especially when you know you didn't do anything wrong. Always carry an ID. Only give it to them if they ask. Do not speak too much. As a good friend of mine says, sometimes you say more by saying less, right? If you assert your rights and that's the only thing that you say, usually within 30 seconds, police officers know who they're dealing with. Every time I've had an interaction with police, in the first 30 seconds, they're like, oh, who do you know? Who do you know that's in police, or who you have that's law enforcement? And I'll tell them, hey, I have a lieutenant who's an aunt, who's at one police plaza, and they totally change their tune. They act differently, right? Because a corrupt police officer will bank on the fact that you don't know your rights, that you don't know, right? And that no one's told you or prepared you. Always carry an ID. This is important. People don't like to do it, but I'd rather show my ID, be inconvenienced, report it later, than have to actually be arrested and have my life interrupted, right? Learning not to speak too much. Sometimes people feel like if something's happening to them, they have to speak. You say more by saying less. You really do. Remember that they have to tell you your rights and why you're being detained. That's huge, right? So if at no point they told you this vital information, make sure you keep a note of that. When you speak to your lawyer, when you speak to anybody who's trying to help you out, Tell them that as a key point, because cases have literally been thrown out because no one's read Miranda, no one's actually told you why you were arrested, no one's read you the rights and informed you.
So you remember your Miranda rights? You had the right to remain silent? Okay, very good.
And then also, if you do have a situation, because we do this presentation for youth as well as for adults, understand that for kids, if you have kids, make sure that they understand, don't say anything unless you are present. Don't say a word. And they can't force your child to speak. If they do, you need to note that, and it needs to be reported, right? And another key thing, just like they can't move you from one location to another, they can't move your child from one location to another without your permission. Right? Go back one more. Never curse or use profanity. This is key. Now, I understand people think, oh, it's a free country, this is America, but like with all things, we're all human beings. When someone curses or uses profanity, it usually creates aggression. And the reason I put this on here also is that there are certain defaults that police officers go to when they know they're in the wrong. One is disorderly conduct. Two is resisting arrest, right? And in some states, they'll actually consider it resisting arrest simply because you're cursing out a police officer, right? So keep that in mind. If you're saying less, if it's caught on camera, thankfully, most jurisdictions actually have cameras now. If they know that all you did was to search your rights, they have very little to arrest you on, and very little will stick in court.
Always report the issues. Always file a complaint and bring witnesses. Always record bad interactions. Citizens review boards, city council member, state government, media. We all, or most of us here, I'm sure, go out and vote. Some people are going to be voting for the first time this year. Keep the pressure on our elected officials to represent for us the right way, the correct way. The correct way is for elected officials to look out for his or her constituency. You all make up the constituency. So we have to look at our group self-interest. And our self-interest is our very humanity. That's part of it. That's a huge part of it. Force them to acknowledge your humanity and your rights.
Yep. And on different levels, there's a huge push for reform in terms of the prison system. So if you do find yourself on the wrong side of arrest, it is unlawful, you can report that to your local councilman, you can report that to your state senator. These are other ways that you can also report. The more, the better. That is the end of our formal presentation.
So now we'll open it up to questions. If you want to move down, we can get a little intimate, we'll sit by the edge of the stage and we get even more real with it. I know some of you have questions.
So let's rephrase that. Let's move down.
So listen, once again, I'm about to be a 59-year resident of this neighborhood. And this college right here has been a beacon of light in the neighborhood. And we talk about the history of Medgar Evers College. Let's go back before Medgar Evers College, when your Carroll Street building was the Kings County Penitentiary. In 1866, after recognized chattel slavery was supposed to be abolished, they built a prison. The prison was right there on Carroll Street between Rogers and Noe Street. The edge of that prison actually went from Crown Street and Rogers Avenue east to Crown Street and Nostrand Avenue, and all the way up to President Street between Rogers and Nostrand Avenue. That was the Kings County Penitentiary. Who were the people who were incarcerated in that institution? It was primarily poor white Irish people and poor Black people, because they had to put something there, because at the end of so-called end of chattel slavery, you have to recognize that the prison system wasn't exactly on point, and they wanted to find all different kinds of reasons to lock people up and get them enslaved. And then when that closed down in about 1906, they opened up Brooklyn Prep. And it was part of Brooklyn College. So if you look at the sign for the Carroll Street building here, underneath the sign that says Medgar Evers, engraved in the stone, it says Brooklyn College. And I remember before they put the new sign up, a lot of people were calling me and say, yo, D, Brooklyn College, what Medgar Evers, what's going on? I said, no. It was always that way from back in the day. And then after it was Brooklyn Prep, it became Medgar Evers College. So we had a history here, and who was locked up there was 4 Irish folks and Black folks. And then the armory came when the prison shut down. And the burial ground for the prison is where that new building is, this partial shelter building and partial, it's partial shelter, about 80% shelter, 10% market rate housing, 5% is permanent housing, permanent low income housing, and 5% permanent low income housing for people who can transfer over within the building from being challenged with being homeless to being who actually are gainfully employed, but are living in the building in a different unit.
Is that what the is? That the Carroll Street building was the penitentiary?
Yes.
What year?
Penitentiary opened up in 1866 and it closed in 1906.
Yes, 1866. Yeah. So kind of a caveat to what Brother Ashman was saying. Well, first of all, let me just ask you guys a question. Does anybody have any idea why Brother Ashman kept saying, so when he talked about the 13th Amendment supposedly abolishing slavery? Has anybody here seen the documentary 13th on Netflix? You have seen it? Okay, so what did you get from it? Okay. So here's food for thought, right? There's a difference between what people are told and what's reality, right? So if you look at the language of the 13th Amendment, right? First of all, just kind of generically, what are we all told the 13th Amendment does? Simple language. Abolish slavery, right? But what does the word abolish mean? It means to totally get rid of, right? But if you listen to the actual word, you read the 13th Amendment, it says no person shall be held under slavery or involuntary servitude except under the condition that you are duly convicted, right? What are you called a convict? Prison, right? So what it does, it doesn't actually abolish slavery, but it redefines slavery as a prison system.
Right.
And in response, what do? They make basic things in living illegal. So think about this. Black people in America were put into a state of slavery, right? We were Africans who were forced to do something against our will. Now they tell you that you're free, but you need money in order to survive. No one will pay you, right? You need to have an actual place where you live, or you're considered to be a vagrant, right? And what happens if you're a vagrant? What were vagrancy laws? Ways to incarcerate Black people for absolutely no reason.
Right.
Right. And in addition to that, everybody knows about segregation, right? And on a very basic level, they know that segregation meant I can't use the same bathroom as you. You know, it meant that I can't use the same water fountain as you. But there was no law that stated that there needed to be a separate water fountain for Black people. There was no law that stated that there needed to be a separate bathroom for Black people. So, for example, if you go to Atlanta, you go down to the old train station that they have down there, which existed since right after slavery, there's 2 bathrooms, one for white men, one for white women. But if you were Black and you went there, what was your alternative? You had to go to the woods to go to the bathroom. We all are human. We know that going to the bathroom is a basic human need, right? So now you're put into a situation where you have to do something that is demeaning and all these other things. But what is the government's response to that? To send the patrols, to send police officers to look into the woods and find people that are doing that. If you're a Black woman who's doing that, oh, you're demeaned, you get thrown in jail for doing something that even a basic person would do. Like anybody would need to do, right? If you have kids and your kids always have to go to the bathroom somewhere, well, if they can't use these bathrooms, what do they do? Right? I offer this because it's about understanding perspective, right? Because people say, oh, what about the past? It doesn't matter. You always blame stuff on the past, but it has a mark on where we are now, right? It speaks to how we were treated and how systemically things happen. Likewise with the prison system, right? So it started off with convict leasing, right? And sharecropping and so on and so forth. Vagrant laws. And now, what is it today? Stop and frisk, right? It's all these private prisons that are monetizing Black bodies. And it's slavery.
I ask all of you, I worked in the juvenile correction system for 21 years, and I saw so much that disturbed from our kids not getting the proper education while they were incarcerated because they were all school age, between the ages of 12 and 20. And even that is something to be discussed at a later date, when you have a 12-year-old on a living unit with a 20-year-old. It doesn't work. I ask all of you to go and read the 13th Amendment. You all have cell phones, you can pull it up on your phone and read it and understand it, because that is their loophole to get us. Everybody here familiar with Rikers Island?
Yeah.
Rikers Island is prison or jail?
Jail.
Jail. Why?
Because they haven't been supported. Well, they haven't been.
It's a holding facility, exactly. The adult version of what we talked about going to the kids at Horizon Juvenile Correctional Facility, which is just like Crossroads here in Brooklyn, out in Brownsville. All right, it's a holding facility. Why those brothers and everybody's still there? Because they can't afford bail. They haven't been convicted yet. They haven't been sentenced. They can't afford bail. They find different ways. So it's imperative that we understand our rights. Just walking here today and running into somebody yesterday coming in to see Miss Julie just yesterday, I recall your student life building across the street used to be the Bedford Bowling Alley. And I know Kev here remembers that. A few people may remember that, but that was the wall that we used to get thrown up against coming back from the Prospect Heights High School after school center. We would go there to play basketball with Brother Richard Green, who is now actually he's a professor here, so is his wife, so is his daughter, the Green family. And we would get tossed up against that wall and patted down. And we didn't know our rights at the time. And our parents, when we would tell our parents what happened, they were so old school, they thought we did something wrong. Not realizing until many years later that we were just being harassed for walking down the street with the skin that we possess. So it's incredibly important that you research the 13th Amendment, you understand what your rights are, and that you advocate for yourself and our people. It's as simple as that.
Because history is definitely going to provide the context for why these things are happening. When you think about it, if a person is never told, this is the purpose of the police, this is the history of what goes on, and then suddenly you find yourself stopped at, you're 30 years old, you've done everything right, and you're you're just driving while Black or walking while Black, and you don't understand the background, you may be somewhat confused as to what is happening to you at that particular time, right? Just quick story, I remember I went to St. John's University, and I was driving to Jersey City to help a friend move. And I was a little tired, so I had my friend drive the car. And we got stopped by the police. And when the cops were coming, and mind you, he grew up in a household where they didn't prepare him for what would potentially happen. But he reached over in the glove compartment, he just starts digging, and I slapped his hand, and I told him to get back. And he's like, whoa, I said, no, you paused. And I had turned on the light inside of the car, and he went to argue with me, he reached again, and he found a gun pointing in his direction. And I said, you don't do that. Like, you never do that. You don't just go digging in the glove compartment. It's about being mindful of your situation. If you don't understand what could potentially happen in that situation, you may find yourself in a ICU if you're lucky, or people may be attending your funeral unnecessarily. These are things to think about. Would we like it to be a perfect world where everybody could react the same way? Because we do see the double standards. I haven't stopped in cars with, I'll keep it real, friends who have been white and they don't have a care in the world. It's the reality of the world that we live in, right? And I'd rather face that reality honestly and pragmatically than to be delusional and end up in the grave.
I've been pulled over quite a bit for speeding. I used to be an athletic director in the prison for teenagers upstate New York. And we had young men in the lockup for anything as simple as loitering, maybe doing 6 months to a year, or as serious as double homicide. And it's really like, it's sad to see a young man who looks just like you, who's locked up for double homicide, and he's only 17 years old.
And unpack that too, brother.
He's looking at 18 to life for double homicide.
Think about the fact that you started off talking about 6 months to a year for loitering.
For loitering, yeah. And let me tell you something. If you're a loiterer, you're a professional pest. Because all you're doing really is sitting on somebody's property and they told you to leave about maybe 4 or 5 times, and now they get tired and they call the cops.
Well, no, but also it's important to note that sometimes people are actually, crazy as it may sound, convicted of loitering, sitting in front of their own house.
Yes, well, that's extenuating. Yeah, there's an extenuating circumstance for that, absolutely.
You
Now,
know, these are things to be mindful of.
now I've
Depending on where you are.
received my share. Funny story. I received my, and sister, I saw your hand up. All right, so I'm coming to you right after. I'm driving on the Palisades Parkway on my way home. My vehicle's in the shop, so I have a rental. I'm not too accustomed to this vehicle, but I knew I got pulled over 2 days prior in the rental, and the cop let me go. But this time I made sure that I was not speeding, and the speed limit was 60 to 65 on the Palisades. I'm going 55. I got no cruise control, and then whoop, 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 I still get pulled over. Pull over, shut off my engine right away. It's broad daylight. Put my hands in the homeroom. My wallet is, and the keys are on the dashboard. I asked the officer, I have my wallet here. I said, can you tell me why you pulled me over? You were speeding. I'm like, I've never seen this particular officer before. I know I wasn't speeding. I ate it. I went to court. So I'm sitting in court. Same officer must have summoned about, a dozen other people, maybe 13 other people. And I didn't realize it initially, but the person who was ahead of me, the officer said that his speed gun wasn't working. So I was curious to know how he knew I was speeding. So when I came up to the judge asked me if I had an attorney representing me. I said, no, Your Honor, I'm representing myself. And I had my pen, I had my folder, I dropped my pen, my pen, I picked it up, and I asked the officer, he said, do you have any questions you want to ask the officer? I said, yes, I want to know how fast I was going. And he said, well, I said, you can't tell me how fast I was going? He said, well, I wrote you up for going, I think it was like 78 in a 65, right? I said, well, I'm curious to know what the formula was. Can anybody tell me at what speed my bottle fell to the floor 2 times I dropped it? By the way, I dropped it on purpose, both times. Well, I asked him how fast did my pen hit the ground? And he couldn't tell me. And I looked at the judge. And I said, Your Honor, if he can't tell me how fast my pen hit the ground, how does he know I was speeding? Because I'd like to know that mathematical formula. Any math wizards here? Any mathematicians here? He could have figured it out. Not only did they dismiss my case, the judge asked how many people in here were summoned by this officer on that day. And there was, like I said, about another 13 people, about 11 more people, they all got dismissed. But I know that he pulled me over only because I was black. He pulled me over because I was black. And he just pulled over the wrong person. And Lord knows, I'm no angel. I had my times when I was speeding and I got summoned because I was speeding and I deserved to be summoned. But that day, how many people have been accused of something that you just didn't do? Isn't that like a jacked up feeling? Isn't that a jacked up? I mean, we make enough mistakes. As spiritual beings having a human experience, we make enough mistakes on our own accord, right? Lord knows, like some of us have probably made 2 or 3 mistakes already today, right? But then to be accused of something that you 100% absolutely are not guilty of, there's a whole other thing, especially when it comes to the law. Young lady, you had a question in the back?
My aunt now is told by the judge that she has to get the police report. And so, but I was told I have to get it because I found. So when I called, I think it was the 42nd precinct in Bronx, they explained to me that because it's less than a year, that I have to now go to report to one police class, that they can no longer help me, even though they see everything in the system. So my first question is, how long would you be able to, can you get a police report from the precinct? Like, how long can I obtain it? Because I was told if I would have done it by 3 weeks, that's what somebody else said to me. If I would have done it by 3 weeks or 4 weeks, I would have been able to get it. And the next thing is, they were telling me that I have to get an appointment to be able to go to one police class. I cannot just go there. So when I'm trying to call, it just keeps sending me around and around, like there's this voice, video recording. I mean, not video, audio recording. And then when I tried to get the detective to help me, he's never returned my call, and I called like 6 times. He was on the case, he was on the paperwork. Right. So now the thing is, the reason why we need a police report is because we can put out in the park.
Sure.
Because everything is locked up and taped up. So I'm wondering why is it that, like, I didn't understand why is it so much red tape just to get a police report that I filed.
Well, I know you're going to answer, but before that, you have our condolences. You have our condolences.
Yeah, definitely our condolences. We can't speak to why the procedures are what they are. It's just simply the way that they do things. You can get to my understanding, you can get a police report almost indefinitely because they get archived. And the reason why it's no longer at the police station is because it was archived at 1PP. All you got to do, because I'm a licensed firearm owner and they give you a runaround with other things. So I go down to 1PP and it may take 2 or 3 trips for me to do something. It's just the way that it is. And you don't need an appointment just to go to one police plaza.
Not go until I get an appointment.
Did they-
This is what the precinct said.
Did you go?
No, I wanted to go, but they told me I was gonna just go.
I don't know why they discouraged you because
Okay,
you can.
I can just go.
Yeah, go down to one police plaza. You have to be checked through as a visitor. That you speak to somebody at the front desk, tell them what the circumstances are. If you need to go to a particular office within there, they'll give you a pass to go. You just print it out. You talk to whomever you need to talk to, and if you need to come back, they'll come back. But the police report should be no more than I think $10.
Okay.
It's simple. It's just the inconvenience of having to go down there. I mean, look.
They act like I couldn't go. They said, no, you cannot go unless.
No, you can go to one police plaza. Yeah, it's no problem. Yeah, knowledge is power. I mean, I didn't expect. Yeah, just go talk to him.
Ms. Julie?
I want to thank Thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time out to create this presentation and for coming down here to Mentor and sharing it with us. You opened my eyes to a lot of information that I didn't know about, and I thought that I stayed woke, and I'm trying to continue to stay that way. But can you give us some pointers as to, although you're teaching us how to interact more positively with officers who may approach us to possibly detain us, how do we develop positive relationships with our local law enforcement that we might see? A lot of us take the trains. Sometimes I'm coming down into the train station, that's the first thing I see before I see a transit worker, is an NYPD officer. How do we have positive interactions instead of having that immediate fear or putting myself on defense just before they even interact with me because I see them now, I have this wall on them.
I think a lot of it is communication. Sometimes if you see an officer, you say hello, they'll get to know your face, they'll say hello to you. You have these new officers now, well, they're not that new, they're about 3 or 4 years old now, called NCO. You have your community affairs, you have your youth officers, but now they have the neighborhood coordinating officers. And those officers, I think, they've been a great help. We live here, this is Sector A for the 71st Precinct. 71st Precinct is over on Empire Boulevard and New York Avenue. Sector A covers from about, I want to say, New York Avenue from the east coming west to Washington, and from Eastern Parkway down to Empire Boulevard. So that's Sector A. So Medgar Evers sits in Sector A. As a matter of fact, there's Sector A meetings. These NCO meetings happen every 3 months, and Sector A all the time will meet here in this room, in this auditorium. Get to know your local NCO officers. That's critical. We are neighborhood community partners with the 7-1. If we have any issues, there are times that we'll hear gunshots late at night, and I'll get a phone call from his uncle who just walked in with his wife, Dwayne Nicholson. I'll get a phone call, yo, D, you hear those gunshots? And then my phone will ring, and it'll be a neighborhood coordinating officer calling us to let us know what happened. But that's because the neighborhood and community equity was built up over a period of time. We developed a relationship with them. They know that we're no nonsense, and they know they gotta be straight up with us. So, you know, how many times have you been with D and he gets a phone call from an officer about something that we didn't even know took place? And so we developed that relationship by getting involved with the precinct youth council, getting involved with the youth officer there. Valerie is also, man, I didn't see you. I didn't see you here, girl. So there's 3 of us in the room right now that when something goes down in this sector, the 3 of us might get the same phone call. It's very possible. It's very possible. And that phone call may not be 5 o'clock in the early evening. It may be like 9:30 or 10:30 at night. So it's making a move on our part to get to know those officers better so they make a move to get to know us better. You know, we have one particularly really good NCO who is now a detective, Tiffany Gonzalez out of 7-1, who is like this officer, she was, you know, if you'd have told me she did these things, I wouldn't have believed it. I thought somebody would make up a story. She used to go and pick up medication for elders in the neighborhood, for crying out loud. Like literally, I would give her, she would call me, I missed the call, I'd call her back. Hey, Dion, let me call you right back. I'm picking up Miss So-and-so's medication from the pharmacy. I said, oh, you off work? She said, no, I'm on duty. Like, you don't hear about stuff like that. So as much as we have our challenges, there are a handful who like are really about us because they're of us. And that's what's really important. It's also for us to put pressure to make sure that we get more officers who come from our neighborhoods or neighborhoods like our neighborhoods. Because I was telling Brother Jason earlier, I get pissed off a lot. I can say pissed off, right? I get pissed off a lot because unfortunately, after my generation, I see people who are becoming officers that didn't grow up wanting to be a police officer, wanting to be like a fireman. They took the job because it was 20-year retirement, a pension, a good pay wage, and they didn't have anything else going on. And a friend called them up and was like, yo, you still unemployed? Yo, check it out. There's some city exams coming up, man. Why don't you take this exam? And they mess around, they take the police exam, and they mess around and get called for a physical, and next thing you know, they're getting time to do the 1 mile run. And then next thing you know, they're in uniform, on foot in your neighborhood, and they're scared, and we gotta protect them. Jay?
All right, so I would say that there's two things that are key. Because one thing that helped me in terms of my interaction with police officers was a PAL. When I was growing up, I ran track and I boxed in the PAL. And I think the Police Athletic League got more youth to become accustomed to just interacting with police. But personally, I mean, my thought process is different. I don't really feel like we should have to have a need to even interact with police. I just demand professionalism. You do your job, I'll treat you as a human being and speak to you with respect. We don't have no reason to interact unless there's actual execution of your job in a respectful manner. So for those who have influence with youth, I would tell them, just conduct yourself in a respectful manner. Don't, disrespect police officers and carry yourself with integrity. That's it. At the end of the day, if a police officer decides that they want to come after you in order to fill their quota, just be armed properly to deal with that. But I'll just be honest. I had cops in my family even, and I had no desire to deal with police, just none. I don't bite my tongue about it because the system was not made for us at all. It's a lot of unfairness embedded into it. And seeing the fact that we even have quotas to this day in many places is disgusting. I have a fraternity brother who's a former police officer who actually was in charge of a very large division, and they're given quotas on how many summonses to give out. And he actually had a detail for the Thanksgiving Day parade, and his supervisor was just asking him, how many summonses did you give out? And that's when it struck him. He was like, wait a minute, this is a time when people are taking their families out. It's supposed to be a hospitable time. Like, you're trying to ding me if there's no summonses? So they're gonna go out and just make some stuff up. And this is a harsh reality that we have to realize. We hear stuff like quotas and things like that. We have to be real about what are they doing to fill those and who are they using for that, right? And what type of trauma is it creating? So for me personally, I'm not there to play any games. I'm very straightforward and I'm no nonsense in my life. I'm not trying to smile. I don't brown nose. I don't shuck and jive. I just keep it real. I want the right to be able to walk up and down my street, live my life, and not have anybody interrupt it. And, if I don't call you officer, then it's not a sign of disrespect. I'll have a regular conversation because you're a human being, I'm a human being. The only difference that separates us is you took a certain job, right? And understanding that, there should be no reason why you want to incarcerate me or any of my family in order to fill your quota. This is a no-nonsense, 100% feeling that I have about this situation. And I think it all ends once we all take the mindset that if you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us, right? If something is happening to my neighbor or something is happening to a friend of mine, it's happening to me too, right? So if Dion came to me and said, you know what, cop came after my son, you know what, came after our family. And if we all did that, because I think that was the big turn in the civil rights movement in 1955, because people looked at Emmett Till and they said, that's our kid. That's our community, right? They hid the truth from it, and then finally Mamie Till said, I want everybody to be able to see what they did to my son. And more people took out the visual. So the thing that we all have to collectively ask ourselves is that when we see these things, like we see a young man who stopped, do we just assume that the cop is all righteous? Because in a lot of cases, it's not, right? Do we take the time out to film what's going on? Do we hold them accountable? Are we willing to go through the process of actually being an advocate for change? Because that's the only way that it stops.
Questions? Two. One and two,
You guys said
and then
that,
three.
you guys said that, when the police provokes you, that we should be armed, but what do you really mean by that? Because I feel like a lot of people don't interact with the police.
Knowledge, armed
So,
information.
yeah. It was not literal as a figure of speech. So when I say I say being armed with the knowledge of what to do in those circumstances, right? Because in a figure of speech, as a metaphorically speaking, you can arm yourself in more ways than one. It doesn't have to be a gun or a knife, but in actuality, the most powerful thing you can have for any warrior is their mind, right? And what Brother Ashman was saying, it's just like when you went to, I've fought off court cases like that on my own. I've been in court 4 times, never used a lawyer, and I fought for myself and won every time, just by paying attention to detail and understanding the law. If you're smart and attentive, you can avoid a lot of things. And what I've found is even police officers don't know the 3 different interactions very often. They don't know the very laws that they're supposed to represent. And the fact that they don't know in some cases can actually get you out of a case, right? What do I mean by that? If an officer is saying, I violated X, Y, Z right, and they don't understand according to their own paperwork, this is what are the minimum requirements for me to have that violation. And then I get them to admit in court that I didn't do even half of that. Why am I here?
They're in violation of their own policy and procedure.
Right. Right. And part of it is the understanding of language. It's what I talked about with the 13th Amendment. If a person doesn't understand the meaning of the word abolish, and then they just say, oh, the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery, but then they don't look deeper and they don't say, okay, it clearly says, except under the condition that you are duly convicted. You can't have an exception and then have abolition of something, right? It's either abolished or it's not. Once you create an exception to the rule, then you open up the door for other things. You get what I'm saying? And so it's very important for us to pay attention to what's being said and pay attention to the details of things, especially if you're potentially going to get arrested. If you're potentially going to get arrested and you're upset and you're in your feelings and you're crying and everything, you're not paying attention to the badge number. You're not paying attention to what the cops are actually saying, right? You're not paying attention to whether or not they're, now we have cameras. Is your camera actually on? And understand, court cases are being thrown out now because they don't have a camera, right? Why did your camera get thrown? And let me just say this as a caveat. This is important for everybody. Keep it real. Police officer or federal agent is a white supremacist dream job. So, we'd be remiss if we don't talk about the fact that even when the FBI did their own research, they found that there was a heavy presence of white supremacy within their own ranks, within police officers' own ranks. And what does that mean? This is one of the reasons why, when I say arm yourself with the knowledge, this is why I would never consent to being searched. Because there have been numerous occasions where people consent to search, oh, I don't have anything to hide. And then a racist police officer puts something in their car, right? Of those of you who have access to YouTube, if you go on there and you see TYT or you see there's a Dr. Richie, he almost daily he's posting things. Almost daily, he's posting things that show misconduct by police nationwide. Now, if I arm myself with that knowledge and I don't critically think about it, and I just go about life in kind of a laissez-faire way, and I just think, oh, I don't have anything to hide, I'm just going to trust the police. I could find myself in a courtroom fighting for my freedom when all I had to say was, I don't consent to a search. Make sense?
I'll take you all back to Brother Gamble and I talking earlier in the presentation about us supporting 2 young men at Horizon Juvenile Correctional Facility.
Yep.
When these young men asked for us to support them, we had an ad hoc vote right there on location. It was about us and 5 other bros. We decided to help them. Because I work with that population, they asked me to speak to the counselors to see if in fact they were in good standing with the facility, and they were. So that following week, I believe we had a chapter meeting, and the chapter voted to contribute money and buy them new suits and everything. We get to court, we get there about 45 minutes early, and one of the young men was actually looking at 3 1/3 to 9 for first-degree armed robbery. Now, when we were speaking to them, first of all, they cried when we came in. When Brother Jason came back to measure them for their clothes, they were blown away that an adult actually said something and followed through with what they said they were going to do. So then I show up and they're like, both of you here? And then we go out and we actually get them the clothes, and that was a whole other mind trip for them because they never had adults that came through for them. All right, we get to court 45 minutes early. We don't understand, Brother Gamble and I, we don't understand why that Dante's looking at 3 1/3 to 9 because there was no mention when he told us about his crime, he never mentioned anything about a gun. Yep. So if there's no gun, and he was supposed to be the lead person on this robbery, why is he looking at 3 1/3 to 9? 3 1/3 to 9, I don't know if you all know, but 3 1/3 years to 9 means that you can't go to the parole board until you serve 3 1/3 years. And then 3 1/3 to 9 could turn into almost 15 years real easily because when you're in the lockup, you may have to become somebody who you're really not in order to survive. So you may catch some other charges. So that 3 1/3 to 9 could flip into something a lot bigger in a hurry. So we asked I still remember her name, Lori Hankin. That was the public defender. I still remember her name to this day. Caucasian lady, probably loaded with a ton of cases. And we asked her, so why is he looking at 3 1/3 to 9 if he didn't mention a firearm? Was there a firearm? And then Jay said, well, what about the grand jury minutes? She said, well, I don't remember. I said, what do you mean you don't remember? You're the attorney. So we asked her to go take a look. I said, we got 45 minutes before we go into the court. Go take a look. She went, took a look. There was no mention of a firearm. Come to find out, Dante was more of a lookout than he was the actual person who was roughing up the gentleman who was robbed. So now it's like you're looking at, instead of 3 1/3 to 9, maybe a 2 to 6. Matter of fact, he's been in there for 6 months, 8 months actually at the time. So with good time served, he can leave today. But that only happens because our frat brother invited us to participate in that presentation, and we resonated with those young men. So his mother didn't do her part, so he stayed actually 30. He didn't get to leave that day from court. He stayed 30 days and went home. She was supposed to get into an alcohol treatment program that was going to put her in an apartment, and she didn't do what she was supposed to do. So he did do 30, but he didn't have to do 3 39, 2 to 6, or 1 to 3. And he went home in 30 days. And now last couple years ago, last we checked, he was in Connecticut living with his lady and doing well. And that's when he was 16. This is some years ago. He's a grown man now. And Mike, very similar. Michael was the same, very similar, but he had to do about a year, but he still wasn't looking at 3 1/3 to 9.
Let me also say this quickly too, because it's important to note that when they calculate how many prisoners they'll need to account for with private prisons, they look at 5th grade test scores. So they literally scout people young, right? And they understand also that the recidivism rate is like 77% nationwide in certain areas and certain zip codes is as high as 90%, right? For those of you who know like Eagle Academy or Wings Academy, a lot of these private schools were able to get funding on that basis. They looked at prisons and they looked at the main zip codes where you had kids incarcerated, and they said, we need to get in there, we need to provide some education, right? We need to allow kids to understand and open up their minds that there's other ways of doing things. The reality of the situation is, there are a lot of people who still see Black and brown bodies as price tags. And they're still doing efforts in order to get us incarcerated at a very young age, knowing that once you're incarcerated once and that you are indoctrinated into that culture, the likelihood that you will come back. When I said recidivism rate, that's the rate that if you are in prison and in your release, the likelihood that you're going to come back, that you're going to do multiple times. So we hear things like in America, you have 1 million people that are incarcerated, but they don't look at how many people are there multiple times, right? They don't think about the fact that when you get out, you have very few options. People won't hire you. You don't have all these other things. And you could have been incarcerated the first time for something that's not that significant, but it's about getting you into the system. right?
And you mentioned that 80 to 85% of people who are recidivists that go back, don't go back for a new crime.
Yeah,
They,
Yeah.
they some way get tripped up in either what's called
violations.
violation of your aftercare or your parole. So if you're under 18 and you were locked up initially with juvenile corrections, it will be family care. If you are 18 and above, an adult, it would be parole. So oftentimes, I mean, I saw a kid literally in a lockup get sent back, kid named, well, I won't say his name, but up to Poughkeepsie, I worked upstate, and he was out with his friends, and he shouldn't have been smoking. He was smoking. He literally got home. Well, I'm sorry. He was smoking. He went home, and when he got home, right, like as soon as he turned into his block, he got picked up for a purse snatching. He did not do the purse snatching. But when they got to the precinct, they put him in the lineup, and they picked out the right person. When he was walking out, the desk sergeant smelled the weed. And they said, wait, come back here, test him for marijuana. And sure enough, he had to come back and do a year with us. Came back to do it, and he was just about to start school. We had got him hooked up with Dutchess Community College to play basketball and everything, because he was playing with our in-house team, and yeah.
I just recently came to the United States. That's why I'm just trying to figure out like how the system works, the relations between the different groups of society. I hope my question will not sound inappropriate or something like this. I came from the country where police department and forces, they're equally unfair to anyone. So let's say my friend was
Where do you come from? What country?
from Ukraine.
Ukraine, okay.
Yeah. So let's say my friend, they actually put some weed to his pocket just because he has a dreadlocks, and they knew that it will be easy to like present him as someone who smoked weed. And
Just because he has locks.
dreadlocks, yeah. And weed in Ukraine is like illegal. So and yeah, when it was 2014, the war just started. Actually, we were defending our country, and the police officers was bribed, and they were defending guys who was shooting us with fire guns. So you need to understand how corrupted this system is in our country. But my question, I see like the racist basement of this organization, of the police organization here, according to your words, like has deep historical roots. Yeah. Maybe my experience is not relevant to all the areas, but so far in Bronx and Brooklyn area, where I was living for the last month, I see that at least half and maybe even more of the police officers are actually Afro-Americans or Latin Americans. So like my question, is it somehow like the relations to them and biased or like prejudice from this type of officers, is it different? Or this is more of the problem, like system problem? Or this is more like system problem?
Okay, so it may be difficult for you to understand this, but the reality of the situation is a person doesn't have to be of the opposite race in order to be racist. The reality of the situation is there are quite a few advocates of white supremacy who are Latino, who are even Black. And very often, one of the issues that we run into with people who are police officers, and I know quite a few of them who were picked on when they were in high school, they were outcast, and then they decided to become police officers to fit into a system. And they don't see themselves as Black, they see themselves as blue, right? And so blue or as a cop, right? The blue uniform, right?
Come on,
And so,
Jay, tell what you really want to say.
So,
Every brother ain't a brother.
but I'm saying it, I'm trying to say, I'm using words specifically, right? I'm trying to let you know that when people get indoctrinated into a system, because what you're talking about in Ukraine is people who have been indoctrinated into a system where they no longer see themselves as regular human beings like you and I, they see themselves as, oh, I'm part of this system. I'm police, I'm paramilitary, I'm whatever. So therefore, with that comes this power that I can exert on everyone else, right? There's a specific psychological profile for these people that they use, right? And normally there's a hierarchy. There's the people who are quote unquote at the top who are CEOs, right? And the CEO mentality is most closely related to the serial killer mentality. If you guys ever took, like I was air defense as well as military intel. So I learned a lot about the human psyche and how people think and how to interrogate people. And what you'll find is that a lot of people that are higher up are narcissists, right? And they're manipulative. And the reason why they're able to be in those positions is because they're able to indoctrinate the needy, meaning people who are willing to go against their own self-interest in order to be part of a system, right? And what I mean by that is, I'll give you a prime example, and not to get too political with this, but most people who support Trump actually don't benefit from it. They want to be like him, right? So how can you use somebody as a pawn? You find somebody who wants power, who wants to be like that person, and who, if you can't fight the power, right? For those of you who came early, we were playing Fight the Power. If you can't beat them, you join them, right? And so what we found is that very often there are Black and there are Latinos, and you can be Latino and Black, by the way, right? Because Latino speaks to a culture, doesn't speak to an actual race of people. Mexicans, Dominicans, and Puerto Ricans clearly aren't the same, right? But we bucket them all together, and there are Puerto Ricans and Dominicans that are as dark as me and say, hey, yo soy, I ain't not Black. But we know historically they do have African roots, right? And what some will do is that they would rather partner with the quote unquote winning side. So what I've run into even is that there are police officers who are Black who are trying to make a statement. They want to say, yo, I'm with you, white guys, I'm an officer, I'm not Black. I want to be part of the winning team. And that's what they choose. Until they run into moments where, if you look at the protests that went on in Ferguson, Missouri, protests that went on in DC, there are several lawsuits that people aren't talking about where they embedded police officers into the crowd, right? Kind of like spies. And those police officers, get this, got beat up by police. And they ended up, there's several lawsuits, you can look this up. There's lawsuits in Baltimore, there's lawsuits in Ferguson with police officers who filed police suits against their own police departments because they were beat up by officers who didn't believe that they were part of their crew. That's how deep it goes. But I'll keep it real, selling out never ends well. Selling out never ends well. So they all end up getting a wake-up call eventually. All.
We thank you for being here, taking time out of your schedule to be here with us today. I know there are other things you could have been doing, but you found it in your best interest to be here in our collective self-group interest.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all. I hope that you all got some very much needed information. I hope that this resonated with you, that you take back some of this knowledge into your day-to-day activities, take it back to your families and your classmates. If in future we do have something else like this, remember it, encourage your classmates to come and participate, share your stories. For those of you who may have had an interaction that was negative and maybe caused you some trauma, we do have a counseling center here at the campus. It's located on the first floor of the Bedford building. Please stop by. You don't need an appointment. Go in there, speak with one of our counselors to help you process. Ask any of our peace officers at any time for any information you might have, or your faculty members. A lot of the faculty are here today. Make sure you stop by and ask them if there's anything that you don't want to speak in a public forum. The college is here for you. That's why we keep having programming on here for you. Feel comfortable, reach out to us, and we'll try and find a way to help you.
And actually, let me just let you know how this came to be. Sister Julie here called me, and she wanted to know if I knew anybody that could speak about social justice, and if I knew maybe an imam that could talk about from that angle, and somebody could come out and speak. So I asked her, I said, well, are you talking about knowing your rights? Doing your stop by the police? Are you talking about policy and procedure? We got into it. And as we're talking about, she said, wait a minute, why don't you and Brother Jason do it? And I was like, you know what? I thought you wanted me to find somebody for you. And she said, no. You guys do it. You all should do it.
Y'all think I picked right?
And that's how we ended up. So,
Well, at this time, before you all leave and go to your class, it's about that time, 3 o'clock, I do want to bring up someone who really brought this about. Dr. Maria De Longoria is the chair of our Social and Behavioral Sciences Department. She was able to manufacture this grant for the work group on advancing social justice. If she could just come up for a moment to give a few words. Thank you.
all right. Come on, y'all.
That's not necessary, but I want to thank you guys for coming, right, and supporting the program that we're trying to do. This is the first semester that we've done this initiative, and there is a whole series of social justice events that have gone on and will continue to go on. We're not finished yet, and I'll talk about that in a second. I want to thank both of you for your presentations. We want to have you back. We want to have you back at a time, perhaps during club hour, when we can have a bigger captive audience, because I think what you presented here would be beneficial to the broader student body, and I want everybody to be able to take advantage of this experience.
You think your classmates would enjoy that? Yeah? Yeah? Oh.
Well, whether they would or not, they need it.
You can't hear you. Classmates will enjoy that.
No, seriously, like, let us know, give us feedback.
I think they would need it, right? And I think it'd be helpful. But I also want to thank Julie Augustine, right? She doesn't like this, but she's gonna have to get it anyway. When we put out the call for programming, we got a few responses, primarily just from a couple of committee members. When I went to Julie and I said, hey, Julie, do you want to do a program? She's like, wait, I can do something? I didn't know I could submit something. I thought you guys were doing all the planning. And I said, no, I don't work that way. So if you have an idea, come, let's go with this. So she came up with an idea and she said, okay, so, and gave it to me. I'm like, no, this is your program.
Yeah.
You do this the way your vision, you get your people, you bring it in, I'll support it. And so thank you for doing that, Julie. I mentioned upcoming programs. There is a film tonight that falls right in line with the program that you just did. It's called How Does It Feel to Be a Problem, right? It won the Soho Film Festival. It's in this room at 6:30. It focuses on the systemic racism and social injustices for Black, brown, and red people in particular, right? Marginalized groups. And the film, one of the film's writer and producers, J.W. Wiley, will be here to do a discussion after the film. We can't just drop heavy things on you and then not allow time to process and work through it. And so that is tonight. The film, some of the stars in the film, and I hate to say stars, but some of the people in the film, Danny Glover, not the son, the father. I don't want people coming and think they expect to see Donald Glover, right? Danny Glover, for those old heads, Ed Asner, for some of the younger folks, Jazeer X, I forget, there are a few other people, but representing each of those groups that I talked about. So if you can't come tonight, it's free. Bring whoever you want to bring. We really wanted to kind of build on this programming. So it's not a mistake that these are kind of linked together on the same day. So we want to build on the programming and the initiative. And if you do come, you get something to eat afterwards, okay? So I want to thank you guys again. Thank you, and thank you.
Before you run out, I'm just gonna beg 2 seconds. Can you come up and let's take a picture with the gentlemen, the presenters, before you leave? I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, that'll help me get more money.
Please and thank you.
There you go.
2
More
seconds.
programs for you guys. Come on, yes, everybody get up here.
Come on, just line up right here in front.
Right down here, right?
Y'all act like
Y'all stay up there.
you guys act like you're scared of the camera.
Right here.